Welcome to the StoryMap Screenwriting Podcast. My name is Dan Calvisi of Act4Screenplays.com. Thanks for joining us. This is episode number 11, and we are going to be talking about X-Men Days of Future Past, which just came out this weekend, and we've both seen it. I am joined by Steve Lam, once again, of BamSmackPow.com. How's it going, Steve?
It's going great, Dan. Thanks for having me back again.
Sure, no problem. Thanks for being here. You guys should check out Steve's articles at BamSmackPow.com. He's been doing a lot of analysis, not only of comic books, but comic book inspired movies. And he's got a few articles about X-Men Days of Future Past that are already up. So check those out. And we're going to be talking about the film. We're going to talk about the general universe and the comic book origins and the X-Men cinematic universe, and then we're going to get into the actual screenplay later on. So let's get started. 20th Century Fox releases these movies, and they own the rights to these characters from Marvel Comics, whereas Disney owns the rights to other characters from Marvel Comics, like the Avengers characters. We discussed that a bit last week. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is that Bryan Singer was back as director, and I think that definitely informed the darker tone and look of the film. It reminded me, really, I guess, of X2, the second X-Men film that he directed, that most people look to as the best X-Men movie, maybe before this one, and definitely kind of more of an auteur vision, that it was more of a really, he was in command as a director. What do you think about that, Steve? Were you kind of reminded of X2, or?
To tell the truth, I mean, X2, I wouldn't say I found X2 to be too dark. But I do agree with you. It is a darker tone. Like, I was actually not surprised. Like, I saw a lot of the violence is certainly upped, and hopefully I don't give anything away. I mean, hopefully people have already seen the movie when we're talking about this, but there's scenes where I was like, oh, something's gonna happen. They're not gonna go there, and they did go there. So that was pretty awesome. So I was like, they weren't afraid to cross that line. And yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It's a darker tone, and I think it kind of ups the urgency and the stakes because of that. So I think he did a good job. Good, I guess, a story choice too, or I would say an environment choice to go in that direction.
Yeah, I mean, maybe darker tone is not quite as accurate. Maybe more serious. It was kind of a more serious treatment of the material. But I will say I was blown away. I mean, in the first 30 minutes, there was a lot of language that I don't normally hear in PG-13 movies. I mean, there was an asshole, a couple of shits. There was, of course, the fuck off, which was a callback to X-Men First Class, where they try to recruit Wolverine and he tells them to fuck off. So that was a really funny moment if you caught that. But you just don't normally hear that language in an X-Men film or most wide release PG-13 movies. So that right there was an indication. Also, you open on this really intense scene where they're basically murdering all the X-Men. I mean, they decapitate, was it Iceman or Pyro?
Yeah, they decapitate. I mean, when
they're both of them, I guess
both of them. Yeah, I mean, they annihilated both of them with opposite powers. If you notice that, when he was when they had Pyro, or actually was it Iceman? He had it, and then the guy started freezing up too. Because in another scene, he became sort of like a flaming, like a Pyro type character to fight Iceman. But yeah, they decapitated Iceman. And then in another
pulled
scene,
apart Colossus.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
So yeah, I mean, right off the bat, Singer's saying this is going to be intense. This is going to be serious. This isn't your grandma's comic book movie. So they're killing X-Men, and it's really serious, and you can feel the urgency and the stakes, but yet at the same time we're discovering the logic and the context. So I don't know about you, but the first 20 minutes I was anxious to find out really what was the context of this world. Where in the future were we? What exactly were the rules now? Because I was thinking about the past X-Men films. For example, Kitty Pryde never had the ability to send people back in time, or their consciousness back in time. So I'm wondering, well, how did she get that power? Are they going to explain that? That whole opening sequence, you don't really know why she's going into the vault and doing the is it Cable is the black guy?
That was Bishop.
Bishop, yeah.
Yeah.
So you don't really know why it's so important for her to phase Bishop into the vault. But that it's explained, eventually within a few minutes, but we really don't know in that opening scene. I mean, that opening scene could have been the danger room. It could have all been an illusion. And like we were talking offline, everything online, all the information about the film is saying that it opens in 2023. But I could swear I did not see a year listed on screen. So that was one thing I was wondering. Well, what year was this? How long did this war take that's annihilated most of humanity? But that was a distinct choice by the filmmakers to throw us into the middle of it. And I think it did eventually work. And I'm analytical, and I knew that I was going to be analyzing this film, so maybe I was a little bit more in my head when I was watching it. But what did you feel in that, let's say, the opening 10 minutes? How did you feel about it?
So, coming from a screenwriter's perspective, when they first opened, I was like, oh, this is cool. It looks like Terminator 2, kind of like Terminator 2 Judgment Day. Everything's like apocalyptic, it's done. And then they come in with Patrick Stewart's voiceover, and I thought, how as a screenwriter, you and I both know, you start rolling our eyes, right? Voiceover is kind of a weak way of giving exposition, but in a way it worked here because Professor X is a wise guy, so and Patrick Stewart does have a pretty commanding voice, so it sort of worked, giving some of the exposition. I was blown away. Like, I saw trailers and teasers showing scenes of fighting and violence, but this was just, when you watch it in the theater, and people really should watch this movie in 3D and IMAX, or if they have IMAX 3D, you can watch it there. But you're just blown away by the epic scale of sort of what they're up against, and it really establishes that this new world is just live or die. That's all it is, and there is no. I mean, if you look at the source material, they were put in concentration camps, but this one was just total extermination. It was just basically genocide. I mean, it was just destroying everybody. The first 10 minutes, the question that actually popped in my head was, are these Sentinels controlled by humans, or are they totally like Skynet? Like they become self-aware and they're just doing this on their own volition. That was my question. First 10 minutes.
Yeah, and I guess I know that the answer is that they do eventually become self-aware, right? And they start to kill regular humans because regular humans may create mutants. I like the way the opening scene was written, because I'm sure that this started on the screenplay page, in that we discover that the Sentinels have the power to absorb mutant powers. They let us discover it, without explaining it in action, which is really what you always want to do as a writer. Now, one thing I was wondering, though, are they all synced together wirelessly so that they can pass a power from one Sentinel to the other? Because it felt like that's what they were doing.
So let me pose this idea to you, since you said they were wireless, and this actually occurred in my head just now, is that you said they adapt to different mutant powers. Maybe not even wirelessly. Maybe they have the telepathic powers of Professor X, right? Because maybe their evolution of adapting powers goes into the telepathic also, like Jean Grey. So they could be telepathically linked to each other. But that could be true. That could be true. I mean, they do seem, it's very coordinated, their attacks.
Because the way that they kill Iceman is with fire, and then the way that they kill Pyro is with ice, correct?
Correct.
So that would mean, unless, because I only saw it once, so unless the scene was so quick and the Sentinels switched opponents, but I'm thinking that would be the case. Now, we soon learn that it goes back to Mystique's DNA. We get the backstory, which was, obviously it's basically the MacGuffin of the film, and was a huge choice by the writers and Singer, that the whole concept of the Sentinels and Armageddon goes back to this one moment where Mystique killed Trask, in retaliation for his anti-mutant program. And so because of that, it became even more urgent to the public in the White House that they fully fund the Sentinel program. So it had the opposite effect that she wanted. Now, this, I think, lends itself to kind of the idea of the franchise and the business of it, in that because Jennifer Lawrence is such a big star, do you think they were giving Mystique more of a role in this than they needed to? Because, like, for example, Rogue's powers were to absorb other people's powers. So why wouldn't Rogue be the one that they would experiment on and extract her DNA? Why would it have to be Mystique? And I'm wondering if they knew that they wanted to use Jennifer Lawrence because she's a huge star, so they made Mystique more pivotal in this film than perhaps they wouldn't have.
I agree with you. It could be because Jennifer Lawrence is such a big name star now that they put as much of her into it as possible. Just like they kind of refilmed, was it Channing Tatum for G.I. Joe, because became such a big star, so they gave him more scenes in the sequel. That totally could be the case. I mean, she is selling tickets, and they are in the business of making money, so that could be very true.
Well, while we're on the topic, I don't know what the comic books have been like for the past 10 years, really, with the X-Men, but it does kind of bug me that she's such an amazing fighter, that Mystique is just like the greatest martial artist in the world who can, take out 10 guys in a room. Now, personally, I want to see Mystique do the morphing rather than do the martial arts, because, I mean, we can see well choreographed martial arts scenes in a million movies, and we don't need to see her do it 3 or 4 times, maybe once. But the reason I go to an X-Men movie is to see the superpowers. I want to see the various characters do their powers, and in her case, it's the shape-shifting, and they have used it well, and they use it throughout the movie. Like in the climax, she turns out, she turns out to be the president, or was she Trask in the very end, and she shoots when she shoots Magneto?
I think she comes out as Nixon saying, "Kill me," and then let these other people go.
And then she pulls the gun and
the plastic gun, and shoots Magneto in the neck.
So they've always used her shape shifting really well, but yeah, that's this is a topic that I think we're gonna come back to as far as the franchise, and the kind of the business affecting the story. One of the stories that actually 2 stories came out this week of filmmakers leaving Marvel properties. So Drew Goddard, the showrunner of the new Daredevil TV show, which is going to be on Netflix, which is the Disney side of it, he's leaving. They say over, quote, creative differences. And then Edgar Wright is leaving Ant-Man as director, which is kind of a bigger deal because that's really a bigger property. That also is the Disney side. But it makes one wonder, is it because the corporate, master plan is saying, okay, you have to wedge these characters into this. You have to put Scarlet Witch in there because she's going to appear 2 movies down the line. So what do you think? You think that it is affecting the actual storytelling of these movies?
That Edgar Wright, like, sort of leaving, or people leaving, or
yeah, just in general, filmmakers coming in and out, how they tell the story, what characters are they going to use?
To tell you the truth, I've been giving this a little bit of thought and thinking, like, have you noticed that a lot of this leaving is a recent event? Like, we didn't hear as much about this during when Iron Man and Thor and the original Phase 1 was starting out. Like, when people were stuck to a project, they were signed on there. I think.
Well, you did with a couple of actors leaving the Marvel films, and then what about like with Thor? Kenneth Branagh didn't continue to the second Thor, and then Jon Favreau didn't do the 3rd Iron Man. Shane Black stepped in.
Right, but at the same time, they didn't leave on bad terms because Jon Favreau was still
Mm-hmm.
in the movie as Happy Hogan in all
Mm-hmm.
three movies. What I'm getting at is the fact that it seems like, when Kenneth Branagh left and didn't want to do Thor 2, he basically said, I'm done with Thor. I'm gonna just
Mm-hmm.
leave this, have someone else helm it. This one seems like Marvel is going. Initially, phase one, they were like, it's just a comic book property, so I think we can take some risks. All right, you want to go this way? Go ahead. I don't know. I don't think it's gonna make a lot of money. And then now they've built up this universe and this whole franchise that's like billions of dollars. I
Mm-hmm.
think Marvel's sort of coddling it now, going like, we got to be really careful what the next step is. We can't be taking risks. When I think the risk that they took was actually was that's why they have the success they have today.
Mm-hmm.
So I think this recent shifting of talent is Marvel stepping in, take more control of this money making machine now. Now that they notice that, they got to be careful with it. And I personally think that them shifting this much talent around, it might give them the opposite effect.
Now, as far as you know, does Kevin Feige and Marvel have that much say in the Fox X-Men universe too? Because I know they do in the Disney universe.
I don't think they even I don't think he's even related to the Fox universe part for Kevin
Mm-hmm.
Feige. He's a producer.
Well, to bring it back to X-Men, as you notice, in the end, they've basically brought everyone back to life, and we're starting over with things are happy and content at Professor X's school, and all of the original cast is back. And, Jean Grey's alive, Scott Summers is alive. Hey, there's Anna Paquin, as Rogue. Everybody's here. The whole gang's here. So I wonder if that was a directive from Fox initially, like, okay, make the movie you want to make, Singer and Simon Kinberg and the other writers, but it has to end where we can bring back the original cast. You know, um, I wonder if that was the case. And you and I were talking about the time travel aspect, which I'm not usually a big fan of time travel in movies. I think they did it really well in Days of Future Past, but the problem is it always brings up so many issues, and I'm always in my head wondering, okay, what will be the impact, in the future or the past when they make this decision? So like the big question is, well, in the end, is that 2023, which is what apparently was when it began, or is that more 2014? I mean, what do you think? We don't really have any kind of notion, and then that means the next X-Men, which is going to be called X-Men Apocalypse. Does that take place in 2016 or whenever it's going to come out, or does it take place in 2023? You know,
Right. Um.
and is that a
So
problem or not?
so going off of watching the movie and how they always say create your world and follow your rules. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the rules was when you come back to your time, when Wolverine wakes up, he will be in the time he left. So basically 2023, just like but it will be a different, I guess, a different outcome. That's what they
Mm-hmm.
said. So I'm guessing he is in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like a history teacher and everything. That's what I'm guessing. Um, so I
So
think,
now they have the burden that with the next movie they have to make it look slightly futuristic.
well, this is the thing. I think one of the biggest hints was when he woke up. Did you see the alarm clock? It was like holographic.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
I
that's
guess that's
nothing we have here. They wanted to show us that this is a whole different world. This is the futuristic world.
hmm yeah. It just seems like that's going to be such a burden, on
Yeah,
the
maybe.
filmmakers. Um, but maybe they'll just disregard that, like they have disregarded certain things. For example, Professor X died. He was totally disintegrated in X-Men 3, The Last Stand.
Yep.
But then at the end of the Wolverine, he suddenly pops up, and it's supposed to be explained with that line that he has about, what is it? You're not the only one with tricks, or something like
Yeah,
that.
something like that. You're not the one with abilities or healing
Yeah,
abilities or something.
and I mean that's you know it's it's kind of corny.
Yeah,
There's
it's
no real explanation. So basically, they
yeah,
can do what they want, but then again, that's what they do in the comics. So
yeah,
I'm okay with that because, like we were talking about, in our last discussion, they're making the movies more like comics, where you can reboot things and you can retcon things, which is a term that you taught me. And basically anything goes as long as it's not, I guess, so outrageous.
So I think that big gap between Last Stand and the events of Wolverine up to the end of Wolverine, the two of them sort of got their powers back, reconstituted his own body, and different things like that. So I think,
and teamed up too.
And teamed up, yeah. And the weird thing is, when, for continuity's sake, you have Ian McKellen's Magneto going, there are dark forces working against us. I was wondering, how does this, do they know that Days of Future Past, the events of 2023 are coming? Or are they future selves that have come back to tell him about it? Or, I don't, and then that means that when Days of Future Past had begun, have they been fighting this war for 10 years? And they chose to, and like we were talking offline also, is that if that's the case, and all these events had already happened, then why do we not see more advanced Sentinels all over the place in X-Men 1, 2, and 3?
Or maybe they're going to George Lucas all the previous movies, and like in the background we'll just see some Sentinels flying around or something.
I was going to say that too, is that maybe they're going to milk it and they're going to charge you another bunch of money and go the director's cut or the re-release special edition of X-Men.
Well, the other question also is, Wolverine has his adamantium claws in the future, but in the Wolverine they were cut off. So what's the deal there?
One of the explanations when I was looking around is that because Magneto has power over most things that's ferrous or iron-based because he's magnetic, he might have reconstituted Wolverine's claws into metal. Like he might have manipulated it to wrap around his claws. Because I mean, they do ally together, so it would be a benefit for him to have Wolverine be at his best.
Yeah, I mean, in the next film they could just throw in a line where Wolverine says, when you gave me back my claws, you didn't say it would come with this concession or something,
Yeah.
Well, here's another question. When Wolverine first wakes up in the past with the woman in the bed, and then, by the way, we see his naked butt, which is another thing, like, there's some nudity here, which is another thing that kind of makes it less family-friendly. That was kind of surprising. But does he just kill those three guys with his claws?
That's what I was thinking.
The guys who
I kept
come into the room?
You just did that. Yeah, they come in, that looks like the one that's saying, like, are you sleeping with the boss's wife or something like that? Or girlfriend? That's what I was thinking. Like, he just, like, sliced them up and just killed them. Like,
which is pretty hardcore. I mean, in the movies, has he really killed that many people? I don't think he really has, right?
I know in the comic books they always talk about some sort of berserker mode he goes into, and I think in the movies he's done it. I think in X2 and X3. Remember in X3 he was basically, I think, in the forest, and they were shooting those the crossbow at him. He was basically just running at the guy while they were shooting at him. He was just slicing him up.
Yeah, I don't know. It just felt a little bit. It was a little bit jarring to me, Because I mean, these guys were essentially innocent guys,
Yeah.
He didn't know anything about them. If he'd walked in and they were like beating the woman or something, okay, but so that seemed, pretty dark. But again, I think that's probably Singer's influence, and them making a conscious decision, which is good, to not dumb it down, to not water it down, and say, we acknowledge that most of the fans now are adults, and also one of the appeals of Wolverine's character has always been that he's a badass and can slice people up and still be a hero at the end of the day. So yeah, they kept that in. But so real quick, we've talked about the different studios owning the different rights. So at this point, do you know what the deal is with Quicksilver being in X-Men, and then he's also going to be in the Avengers, obviously, because we saw him at the end of Winter Soldier? Do you know how that works? They just have some kind of special arrangement with that character?
I heard that the reason for Quicksilver being in both movies was they had, like you said, a sort of special arrangement or understanding, quote unquote.
Hmm.
But one thing that's distinct between the two is that in the Marvel Cinematic Universe is run by Disney, they are not allowed to mention that Magneto is his father, because Magneto
Okay.
was owned by the Fox realm.
Hmm.
So that's one difference, and fans were pretty much in an uproar about that.
So obviously they hinted that Magneto was Quicksilver's father, but Quicksilver doesn't know it.
Hmm.
And then there was that one line that hints that the Scarlet Witch exists because when they cut to Quicksilver watching all the action happening in the final act, he's at home and he has a sister, a younger sister, and then the mom says something, mentions your older sister.
Yeah, something
So
like,
they're
yeah,
hinting in the direction of Quicksilver's twin sister, which we know is the Scarlet Witch, and we know she's appearing in the Marvel universe as well, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which is owned by Disney.
correct. Which is basically the two, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, was who you saw at the end of the Winter Soldier in the post credits
Hmm.
scene.
Yeah. But meanwhile, at Fox with their X-Men movies, I think they're doing a pretty good job as well. But this film really, Days of Future Past, was kind of what brought it all together. And I think it's going to be a hit with fans because they're disregarding a lot of what happened in X-Men 3: The Last Stand, which a lot of the fans didn't like, even though we should keep in mind that it was the biggest hit of the whole franchise. X3 was a massive hit all over the world. So if you hear fanboys saying, "Oh, everybody hated X3," well, obviously they didn't because it wouldn't have made so much money. There must be fans out there, but I think with this film, they're giving that unity to the whole universe. And like I said, they're rebooting it in the end so that all the original cast can return. I mean, I will say with the X-Men, the one thing that has always bugged me is the black costumes that they gave them for the movies.
Hmm.
I don't understand why they can't keep them. They can't all have their own colorful uniforms. They don't have to be silly, but I didn't understand why they all had to be in black. And it seems like Singer's maintaining that. Well, one thing I have a bone to pick with Fox and their 3D retrofitting department. This film, Days of Future Past, and The Wolverine were the darkest 3D I've ever seen.
Hmm.
They really have to figure out how to improve their 3D, you know, transfer. Because
Yeah.
what I do is I raise up the glasses to look at it without the 3D glasses to compare, and I did that with a number of scenes, and I could see without the glasses that there was so much more color than was coming through with the glasses. And there were literally scenes in Days of Future Past where they were almost black and white with the 3D glasses on.
Right.
And they were meant to be dark. Like when I looked without the glasses, there was maybe just like some edge lighting and color. There was like a little desaturated color, but at least there was color there.
Hmm.
So if you're listening in the Fox technical departments where you do the retrofitting of 3D, get your friggin' act together because,
Yeah.
it shouldn't be that way where if you want to watch it in 3D, you're not getting the full visual palette and you're not getting the filmmakers, intention. I know that Michael Bay actually complained about this with the last Transformers film, and I've only seen the first one on video. I'm not a Transformers fan, but he was saying since they shot it in 3D, he wanted to make sure that the theaters projected it with the right wattage in the bulb
Hmm.
because you need to actually use more light passing through the projector. And
Hmm.
so he complained about that because more light means more energy, means a higher electric bill. So that's why the theaters don't always project it with the right wattage.
When I saw it in real 3D, so have you noticed if you put on the IMAX glasses, and if you were to ever tilt your head,
Hmm.
you'll start seeing the double image that they do to project for the left and right eye. So what I noticed with the real 3D glasses, I did the same head tilt
Hmm.
check during Days of Future Past. It didn't do the double vision thing, but it brightened up the picture. I saw
Huh.
it literally become like almost like it just someone turned up the like a dimmer and turned it up.
Hmm.
So it was really strange. I did that a couple times in a couple scenes, and it just looked
But
like
you were still getting the 3D effect though?
I was still getting. I mean, I was still getting the 3D effect.
Huh.
Yeah, I didn't see any of the double vision stuff. And
Yeah, but yeah, when I see 3D in a true IMAX theater, I've never had the experience where I thought it was too dark. So, and I know the image is bigger, like the actual. If they're projecting it digitally, the actual
yeah,
pixel, there's more pixels, obviously.
yep,
And then that's another issue is like film IMAX versus digital IMAX.
yep,
There is a difference, and Christopher Nolan's really big on maintaining film.
yep.
Uh, but but anyway, that's a whole nother discussion. So why don't we talk a bit more specifically about the screenplay? Uh, One thing I like in Days of Future Past is that there's strong motivation. The MacGuffin essentially, as we mentioned at the beginning, is that everything goes back to that moment in the past where Mystique killed Trask, and that kicked everything into motion. And so it's very clear their goal when Wolverine goes back in time. The goal is to convince her not to kill Trask or to stop her from killing Trask. So there's very strong motivation. We know the stakes and we know the goals of the characters. Now that kind of gets a twist, and I wonder if this was. You think maybe this was the end of Act 1 twist when Magneto tries to shoot Mystique? Because he's basically thinking, okay, forget about her shooting Trask. If I just kill Mystique, then I will stop the future war. So do you think that was really the first turn? Because that leads to that whole action sequence where she's put on camera and the whole world sees her, and so they actually have the opposite effect where he's now caused more paranoia about mutants.
Right. That was. I mean, I like that decision. Don't get me wrong. I like the decision they did with that, with Magneto shooting her. That kind of jarred me and surprised me because he was
Mm-hmm.
all for I'm protecting my own kind and everything. I thought he was going to grab the gun and just directly shoot Trask because that would have been much, I think a better option because if he kills Mystique, Trask is still alive. He can still use Mystique's dead body to I think create whatever he needs to for the future Sentinels.
Mm-hmm.
I guess you could say it was a twist just to make things more interesting and I think to maybe give them a solid villain out of Magneto again.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably why they did it. I didn't mind either way. I thought it was certainly surprising that he did that to say like, and it kind of adds in. I'd say for character establishment, it does add into his more militant behavior of saying what needs to be done needs to be done. In this war, there is no time to be sad and soft. If we have to
Mm-hmm.
kill our own kind to make sure more of our kind survive, then so be it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a couple things there. Firstly, it confirmed what the audience was thinking, because I was also thinking the same thing. Um, what if they were to kill Mystique? Would that solve everything?
Hmm.
And then secondly, it makes Magneto back into a villain because you that's one of the cores of the X-Men cinematic universe is that Magneto is the arch villain. You know, so at some point it was obviously a directive of theirs where they're going to turn him back to the dark side. Yeah, I'm wondering if that was the midpoint. I'm thinking that scene was probably the midpoint. I haven't timed out the film obviously. So the disaster is that now they're back in the same camp. That once again, the fear of mutants is going to fuel the Sentinel program, and that's exactly what happens.
Right.
Another thing that happens is that Wolverine has those flashbacks to Stryker, and so then that has an impact in the future where he's like, I guess you could say, going through withdrawal, or the mental link from the future to 1973 is being wrecked, and I think that's the point at which his claws come out and he wounds Kitty Pryde too. So now you have some really strong consequences and stakes that have been escalated in each timeline. So that scene really accomplishes a lot. So that worked. I think that worked really well in the screenplay. But like we were saying, it's that unity of story that they've achieved here, where both timelines are working in the same forward progression of the narrative, and you have characters in both timelines that are pushing the story. You have multiple motivations, and this leads to one of the things that I think is done the best from the screenwriter's perspective of this film, which is multi-protagonists. Wolverine begins as who we think will be the main protagonist, but it really becomes a multiple protagonist piece because we have multiple arcs. In fact, he doesn't really arc. Externally, he does because he goes through all of these challenges and then he ends up at the bottom of the lake, quote, drowning, but of course he doesn't drown. But it's the other characters that really go through these arcs. Probably Professor X would be the biggest one, which worked well for me. I thought McAvoy was really good. What did you think about the different arcs of the characters?
I thoroughly enjoyed all their arcs. I mean, the most surprising one was, the goal was always to stop Mystique, but it was Mystique who actually saves the world, because because of what she did, she showed the world that a mutant can protect the world from other mutants. Right, and that's also what leads to Trask getting arrested and the Sentinel program being canceled. And James McAvoy's arc was pretty impressive too. I mean, he starts off as drunk, and while we're on it, we can talk about the role reversal, that Wolverine is basically the mentor in this case, for McAvoy's Professor X. And at the end, McAvoy, of course, throughout the whole movie, he's losing hope. And then there's that scene with he attempts to use Cerebro, and it was the first time he stopped taking the serum. And Wolverine uses his mind as a pathway for young Professor X to talk with older Professor X, Patrick Stewart, and he gives him hope. And I think the full arc happens when James McAvoy speaks to Mystique, right before, when she has the gun raised at the president and his administration. And I think that was the full arc of saying that all is not lost. Like you can't base it on one thing. So yeah, I mean, I think the arcs were unexpected. Not the types of arc that you thought was going to happen. And I think it's really impressive that Mystique was a very gray character in this. And I think Jennifer Lawrence, a lot of people online were saying they don't like her performance because they felt like it was too understated compared to the other people's performance. But I thought it was perfect. I mean, one thing that established it really well was when she broke into Trask's office, and you see her as Mystique tearing up, see that her friends have died, and there's true motivation behind this. It's not all purely hate and I'm an evil person, I'm going to retreat at the end. She's like, this is payback. If I don't do this, more of these things will happen. So I mean, she wasn't just insanely just killing everybody. She had a plan. She knew what to do, and at the end, she knew that not killing everybody is going to benefit the future the most, because now in a way she did a character assassination versus a physical assassination. She did a character assassination of Trask, basically saying, I'm not what you think I am. After all this has happened, I'm going to let you live, and I'm going to save the rest of the presidency.
Mystique's arc is probably the key arc in the whole film, but then we also have really strong arcs with Eric Lensher, Magneto. I even thought, we haven't even mentioned Quicksilver, who was just a super fun character, and he had that really cool scene in the Pentagon where he, looked like he stopped time, but it's really him moving in fast motion, and he basically saved the day and deflected the bullets and made the guards punch themselves out. That was a really cool moment, and I like the use of the music there because he puts on his headphones.
Were Walkman invented in '73?
Yeah, I don't think so.
I don't think so either. It looked like those earbuds look like iPad or iPod earbuds.
They kind of look like Walkman.
Walkman things. I was like, wasn't that an invention of the '80s or something by Sony, or at least late '79? But anyways, but I mean, whatever it was a fun scene. I really enjoyed it, and in one of my articles I wrote how well that established character too. I mean, we always talk about in screenwriting that you have to layer scenes, try to do multiple things in one scene, right? Don't try to spread it out. Let your scenes do double or even triple duty. What I liked about it was the fact that we show off his powers. We know that it's a great action scene. At the same time, he could have easily killed those people. Basically, we find out this guy's likable. He's not going to kill anybody. He just wants to
Hmm.
save everybody. And then he gives that guy a wedgie. He tastes a taste of soup. It's fun-loving. You know, he just wants to play gags and be a fun guy. He doesn't want to hurt anybody. And then I mean, I thought that scene was just, it was a key scene. It was only a few minutes long, but it was just one of the most creative uses of that sort of, what Matrix deemed as, or, created that term bullet time.
One of my complaints about Quicksilver and Magneto is they're almost too powerful, you know. Um, I mean, Quicksilver really could be the most powerful person on Earth because no one could ever catch him. You
Hmm.
know, he could really do anything. Um, and then Magneto also, I mean, if Magneto can lift an entire stadium, and slam it
Right.
down, and while controlling these massive sentinels, and he's almost all powerful, and
Right.
so that to me is a little tough, but that's a challenge to the writers. I mean,
Right.
that's one of those things like we were talking offline about Ant-Man. Ant-Man can shrink himself and he can control ants. So then the question is, well, how does controlling ants really do anything, or how can he defeat a villain by controlling ants? It sounds like a really corny power. Well, that's where a good writer comes in, where they create a way to use that device. So in Days of Future Past, they came up with the device of the non-bullet, what Trask called the polymer, um,
Mm.
compound. So obviously the screenwriters of huge films like Days of Future Past, they have certain restrictions and certain guidelines that they're given by the studio for the rules of their world and how to populate that world. But if you are a screenwriter on your own and you're setting out to write your own superhero screenplay, which hopefully begins with a unique take on the genre, because you really want to have that unique concept, you should probably use my story map method to build that narrative, starting with your main dramatic elements, which is what I call the basic story map, which focuses on your protagonist and their goals, and it defines key elements like theme, main dramatic conflict, your log line, the different characteristics of your protagonist, etc. And then the full story map, which you do next, defines the four main story engines of your narrative, which are Act A, Act 2A, Act 2B, and Act 3. So it defines the major thrust of the plot in those sections, and then it defines the 12 to 15 major plot beats, those signpost beats in your film. Now, I story map a lot of movies, and lately I've story mapped a lot of superhero movies, and we know from watching Days of Future Past that it does adhere to the story map. Now, we haven't timed it out, so we can't say exactly where in the running time those beats happen, but I'm pretty sure that it does follow the story map, which is the classical way to break down your story. And Steve, you used the story map recently with your own script, right?
Correct. Yeah, I used it to write an action adventure sort of thriller spy movie, and I found it helped it a lot because I was able to first set a character, like you said, set her goal, and then after setting out the skeletal 12-point structure of the story map, I was able to just slap on sort of the flesh and the clay of it, and it made the writing a lot more easier because you know where you're going versus meandering around and not hitting the specific signposts, the things that would keep people engaged.
Hmm. Yeah, and I really think hopefully you also did the exercise of mapping some template films, and when you map a template film, like let's say Captain America the Winter Soldier or X-Men Days of Future Past, you're seeing how the pros do it, how they break down their stories, where they place those key plot points, and it's forcing you to do written analysis of a film versus just watching it and discussing it on a podcast, for example. Um, so it really forces you to dig deep and break down every element in the story and see how the writers and the filmmakers told that story. So I would really encourage you guys to do your own maps of superhero movies that you love and that you think worked really well. And we definitely think that Days of Future Past worked well. And I have to give kudos to the writers, who are Simon Kinberg, Jane Goldman, and Matthew Vaughn. With that in mind, let's talk about something that's commonplace now with these films, which is having a post-credit scene which extends the universe into the next franchise or the next film, the sequel, whatever it is. So now we have Fox following the Marvel tradition in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So we end on what I didn't know. I didn't know who this character was at the time until I looked it up after. But we flash back to ancient Egypt, and we see this character who is known as Apocalypse in the comic books. So Steve, what do you think? Do you have any idea about what exactly they're setting up here? Because obviously time is an element again. If we're flashing back even further to ancient Egypt, do you have any idea about what they're going to do with it?
So obviously they're setting this up for X-Men Apocalypse, which is going to be the next movie that's coming out. And I think the last time I checked, it's supposed to be 2016. I kind of briefly know who Apocalypse is. He's supposed to be like a 5,000-year-old mutant and stuff. That's awesome. It sort of reminds me of that Avengers final scene with Thanos.
Mm-hmm.
But this one, I felt Thanos was a little bit more organic to the Avengers, where you found out he was sort of like a mastermind behind the whole Loki invasion with all the the Battle of New York and stuff. Apocalypse, I don't know where he's gonna fit in. It got a great fan reaction because people who are comic book lovers obviously know who that character is, and they knew where it was going, so they were cheering. But from a screenwriting perspective, it just felt like it was just put in there, because if it was any other movie, you'd be like, who is this character? What does he have to do with the story?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it would have been stronger if it was a payoff to a setup in the film, because obviously when you time travel, you affect things, in the world, and so it would have seemed like it was more organic, like you said, if he was affected by the events that we just saw in the movie. So it kind of feels like Fox is, trying to do a Marvel, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
by doing this. But yeah, it's so removed. I mean,
Yeah.
in some ways it's interesting because it's such a mystery. Like, what the hell is
Yeah.
going on with this guy creating the pyramids?
Yeah, exactly.
What does that possibly have to do with 1973 and in 2023? But I don't know. I will say it's interesting that both of the next films in these huge franchises, X-Men Apocalypse and Avengers Age of Ultron, both feature famous villains in the title, so obviously they're going to be a huge element of the next movie.
Correct.
And that does excite me because I like when they really build a compelling villain, that really makes a superhero movie. And so in the next X-Men film, he's going to come out of hiding and unleash this terrible army on the world, and the X-Men have to save it. I don't know.
Right.
So, but one of us is going to have to infiltrate Fox or Marvel and find out the plans for this movie. And then we're going to have to come back and have another podcast in which we reveal to all of the fanboys of the world what's going on with Apocalypse.
Definitely true. I mean, we probably have to use some of Mystique's powers and pretend to be Kevin Feige, and then.
Yes. Okay. So any last thoughts on X-Men: Days of Future Past?
Most screenwriting books and screenwriting lessons tell you focus on one guy, and one goal. They balance multiple protagonists really well, and multiple antagonists too. And their goal sort of, it was still the same, stop Mystique, but it sort of was a very unexpected twist ending that was satisfying.
Yeah, your goal is to surprise the audience. It's to subvert the expectations, not support them. And in this case, they had a bunch of complications that really were surprising. That's essentially what a plot is. It's complications along the way as they journey to achieve their goal. So in that case, it really worked. I also like something we didn't mention was the connections in certain sequences between the past and the future, where they were cross-cutting. And what they're doing there is they're integrating lines of action. So they're bringing together these disparate lines of action into one single line of action. And that's tough to do, on the page. So I really have to applaud them there.
I mean, I would love for them to add newer characters, fresher blood inside of it. And you said like another first class. I would probably call this class of 2023 or something like that. You know,
Well, the other inconsistency, kind of suspension of disbelief, is that none of them have aged.
yeah,
Which that would be interesting if in the next film, they go lighter on the makeup and they show that these actors are actually in their 40s. Hugh Jackman would probably be over 50 at that point. So they don't all have to look perfect, and you could kind of say like, hey, they're in their 40s and 50s and they're ready to retire, and here comes the new lineup. But who knows? There are definitely a lot of superhero movies and TV shows out there. The universe is constantly expanding, and suckers like us keep giving them our money.
exactly. I every time I hear just anything with powers or anything like that, I'm already on Fandango paying for my tickets.
Yes, we are chomping at the bit here. But I just hope Fox fixes its 3D, because
Yeah,
I don't want to see a super dark movie,
yeah,
visually at least.
yeah. I agree. I agree. I mean, that's probably gonna get more perfected as time goes on.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, I hope so. So, all right, we'll check out more of Steve's writings and musings at bamsmackpow.com, and you can read more of my stuff at act4screenplays.com. That's FOUR. And you can also find my Story Maps books in ebook form for the Kindle on Amazon, or you can get PDFs in the highest resolution quality that you can print at home on act4screenplays.com as well. So, Steve, thanks for joining us again, and we will see you guys next time on the Story Maps Screenwriting Podcast.